When it comes to video nasties, a question that's always been at the forefront of my mind is, did this film deserve to be on this list? Indeed, the original brief of the Video Nasties Act was to prevent films from reaching the general public that could morally corrupt viewers or inspire them to commit horrendous acts. It's vague enough that it could loosely be applied to any film, but not so loose that some obvious titles would get caught in the crossfire. When it came to the 39 films they picked that made up the Section 1 list of titles, there are a few obvious choices, such as Tenebrae or Cannibal Holocaust, that do kind of meet the brief and could potentially have influenced someone out there to do something. But for every Holocaust, there's a Beast in Heat or Night of the Demon, which proves that these people really didn't know what could corrupt people and that ultimately they were just pissing in the wind. And that in turn lands me with today's film, Fight for Your Life, a home invasion thriller of sorts that, for the most part, had me scratching my head as to exactly why this film was anywhere near this list. And then a couple of things happened and I simultaneously understood why this thing got listed, and at the same time audibly groaned that that was why this film got listed. The movie opens with some lovely location work of New York circa 1977, as we follow a police convoy escorting 3 very dangerous prisoners between prisons. There's Chino, a European gentleman in for murder, Chow, an Asian gentleman in for child abuse and assault, and the leader of the gang, Jesse, who's in for assault, robbery, various murders and attempted murders. Basically the guy's a sadist and just enjoys killing and torturing. Anyway, so far so solidelic, but things come unstuck fairly quickly, when a robbery attempt goes wrong, causing the robber to plough his car directly into the police transfer van, knocking it off the road. The police are shaken, but okay, and they decide to check to make sure that the prisoners are all still in one piece. However, the second they open the van doors, the prisoners knock one of the cops out, steal his gun and start a gunfight with another cop, who then gets shot and has his gun stolen as well. The gang free themselves, tool up and steal a car belonging to a pimp. Their plan? Flee to Canada as soon as possible and eventually move to France. But the police have been notified of the break and are already closing the gap on tracking them back down. It's at this point that we're then introduced to the Turner family. Father and husband, Ted is a minister for the local church and has built his family on the teachings of the Bible. He has a son called Floyd who's bold and no nonsense, and a daughter, Corrie, who's hoping to go to college later in the year. Also in the family is Ted's wife, Louise, and Grandma Turner, who's sassy as hell and doesn't stand for nonsense. With all the players introduced, the film then begins to take shape, as the gang rob a gas station and steal a tank's worth of gas to get them the distance they need to go to get to Canada. They drive more or less through the night, and suddenly it's the next day. Ted needs to head into town to run some errands, and Corrie also needs to head to the local liquor store to get a couple of bottles of wine, as that evening they'll be hosting a friend of the family, Karen, who was briefly dating Ted's eldest son. He unfortunately died not too long before this film starts, and the dinner was kind of a way to keep Karen and the memories of their eldest in the family, so it's a rather special night. Unfortunately, this isn't to be, as Corrie heads into the liquor store followed almost immediately by the gang, who promptly stick the place up, steal a couple of bottles of good quality whiskey and the contents of the cash register, kill the owner and take the only living witness, who happens to be Corrie, as hostage. Corrie is forced to take the gang back to the Turner house, where slowly but surely all of the Turners return home from their various errands to find the house in lockdown, and that they're now prisoners to Jesse and the gang. Jesse's rules are simple. If the Turners do what's asked of them, they get to live. Jesse and the co are going to hang out at the house for the next day or so and leave when it goes dark, taking the Turners' car in the process to help better hide them on their escape to Canada. Unfortunately, Jesse and the gang are all massive racists, like basically every other word out of their mouths is the hard R word combined with every single possible black racial slur from the 18th century up to the present day. And one thing Jesse seems to love more than anything else is antagonising a family that he deems beneath him. To that end, the Turners are forced on multiple occasions into degrading and offensive acts under the risk of being murdered by Jesse. This includes calling Jesse Massa at all times, forcing Ted to dance and then beating him unconscious with his own Bible, disgustingly eating all of the Turners' food, and doing whatever they like to the Turners or anyone who happens to drop by to check on them, leading to beyond despicable acts taking place at the Turner house. But the cops are still hot on their trail, and the Turners aren't going to take this lying down, as they use their own skills to their advantage, and a battle of wits takes place between the cruel criminals and the turn-the-other-cheek Christians, which all leads to an epic showdown that's more than deserving of its namesake. With time running out, will Jesse and the gang make it to Canada? Will the Turners make it out of there alive? And oh God, I hope Jesse doesn't kill that baby. That would be terrible. All this and more will be answered if you check out Fight for Your Life. And rather surprisingly, what I thought was just going to be a fairly run-of-the-mill exploitation film actually turned out to be more than half decent. But at the same time, not a film without its fair share of problems to go alongside it. So right off the bat, the film's subject and plotting itself isn't what got this on the Video Nasties list. The sheer weight of racist rhetoric in this film would even make Tarantino blush. But racism and British institutions go together like peanut butter and jam, so I imagine the BBFC couldn't be any less arsed about that if they tried. No, the reason this film got the dreaded Video Nasty rating was for breaking two and a bit of the big no-nos defined by James Furman and the team. The first is extreme violence or sexual violence towards women, as there are two scenes of strong violence against women and one heard but heavily masked rape scene, which Death Wish came out about 5 years before this film and did about as bad as this, so I don't think that alone got it nastied. But also in this film is at least one instance of severe physical violence towards a child, which probably was the final nail in the coffin for this film. Not helped by the murder scenes being just a little bit gorier than many films of the time. A lot of critics contemporary and of the time compared this film to The Last House on the Left, which again was about 5 years this film's senior and was also a Section 1 nasty. So it really wouldn't surprise me if the censors watched this, drew that comparison themselves and just lazily slapped a nasty titling on it, followed by fully refusing a certificate to show the film in theatres. Not that that stopped a US release, with even the promotional material for it being unique in the sense that they edited together 3 different trailers for the film. A white people trailer that played more on Jesse and the gang terrorising the Turners, a black people trailer using the film's alternative title of Stayin' Alive that played up to the nobility of the Turners in the face of Jesse's gang of bastards, and the final one, a teaser trailer that literally just is a shot of Ted firing a gun as a still photo, running in silence over a "Fight for Your Life" caption. And it's a real shame, honestly, that it didn't make its way over here, because I would argue that this is actually one of the better video nasties out there. For starters, the script is probably the best example I've seen of a rock-solid home invasion thriller. At 86 minutes long, it runs more or less at a clip, with only a couple of weird moments in the second act where it's painfully blatant that the writers were idling for time to try and get it as close to 90 minutes as possible. Otherwise, the first act is incredibly well handled in setting up the gang, the heroes, the scenario, and the bleak, slightly tongue-in-cheek tone that will carry the film right the way up to the end credits. The second act is relatively strong, but does falter once or twice due to the aforementioned padding. But nothing that's too egregious. The padding is a little bit forced and a bit weird in the sense of it puts the characters in a style of behaviour that feels very much out of character for them, at least based on what we've seen up to this point. However, the film does manage to pull itself back from the brink just in time for the third act, which is a rip-roarer of a finale that managed to surpass my expectations and end about as solidly as a film like this could end. In fact, right the way up to the end, I was almost certain it wasn't going to stick the landing, so when it did, I was doubly impressed. The acts are all really cleanly divided up, with absolutely seamless transitions and even a couple of fake-out moments that make you begin to second-guess the exact direction the film may be going in. Which, hey, I'm used to films on the nasty list having only one plot line and they don't even manage to make that work. So something with multiple narratives that manages to carry itself through 3 acts whilst using visual storytelling over just exposition dumping has got to be a win in my book. However, it's not all sunshine and roses. The film does have 2 problems that I feel really hold it back from it really well and truly winning me over. The first is the racist language, which, look, I appreciate it was a different time and some of my favourite movies use racist language openly and consistently to help emphasise the time that the film took place, or to give a character a particular style or outlook that shorthands them to the audience. However, the sheer rapid fire and intensity with which this film launches racist rhetoric is frankly oppressive after a while. It hits hard in the first few instances, and then I began to go numb to the hate before finally just becoming depressed that it just wouldn't let up, even for a moment. I get that the filmmakers really wanted to emphasise how awful Jesse was, and the themes played throughout about how Jesse's racism is fueled by the fact that he envies Ted and his family and the life that Jesse has ultimately been denied. But it feels less like using Jesse as a mouthpiece for why hate for different races is wrong, and instead, it feels more like the crew are trying to push their luck on just how much racism they can fit into a movie before getting called out on it. Now don't get me wrong, I am not saying for a second that the filmmakers are racist, but in my opinion, I do feel that there were tells here and there that would lead me to think that, at minimum, someone with prejudiced views gave this script a once-over. Because apart from the absolutely astoundingly awful racist dialogue, the Turners, as characters, are notably underwritten in terms of their backstory and mannerisms. Jesse, Gino and Chow all get relatively decent backstories. Their characters develop over the course of the runtime. Hell, even the cops who are tracing the gang get families, backstories and character development. But the Turners? Ted is seemingly the only member of the family to get any growth or backstory. He's established as some kind of minister, but the film doesn't really go into detail, and his growth is really more of a man pushed to his limits snaps arc than anything meaningful or more progressive. Outside of Ted, Floyd gets the tiniest bit of development in helping push his dad towards taking some action, but Grandma, Louise and Corey are all basically given no backstory at all. They have almost no character development, unless rape with very little comeback counts as character development. And for the most part, it feels like their sole function is to share out dialogue where appropriate to make sure that the audience aren't left too much out of the loop. Now, I feel like you could have done a film with a lot of racist rhetoric if the family were very well established and all the players had solid character development arcs. I think you could have done a film where the rhetoric was toned down and the arcs were much more bedded in. But combining giving the core black family in this feature almost no backstory or grounding beyond they're a God-loving black family who love Martin Luther and are successful, with almost unending racist tirades, feels almost to me like the filmmakers essentially made up a black family to be abused, and even though their representation in this is solid, it's hard not to take on board that the racist elements here may have gone just beyond the realm of some writers guessing what racists act like. It's a shame really, because had they toned back on the language a bit, given the Turners just a little bit more history and development and tidied up the second act's random character deviations for the sake of padding, this could have been an absolute knockout contender for one of the best nasties on the list. But unfortunately, those issues do ultimately hold it back from being the best that it could be. The script was written by TYTD veteran Straw Weisman, who you may remember from our reviews of Bikini Model Academy and Cyborg 3, two very early reviews and a commentary from when we were really only just getting started as a channel. Since the last time we touched on Weisman, he seems to have more or less shifted full-time into producing, with several movie and TV credits between 2015 and 2024. Fight for Your Life would be Weisman's first original screenplay, with his first writing credit being just before this, where he adapted an existing script for the film Pelvis. The film was directed by Robert A. Endelson. He has 2 directing credits, this was his last film, and before this he worked on The Filthiest Show in Town, which was essentially a softcore porn film based on The Dating Game. It basically wrote itself. After working on this film, Robert seemingly got a job working in dentistry in New York, a job he's apparently still doing to this day, so fair play to the guy. And on the direction front, again, I was really quite impressed. I can't say I was particularly blown away, nor can I say I was stunned by the creativity on display. But what we do have here is an incredibly sturdy work that, given this was a low-budget film, looks incredibly professional, and especially given that this was only Endelson's second ever feature and his first ever non-porn feature, he seems to have really got a keen eye for tension building and suspense. Endelson has worked very closely with the crew to realise what I can say is absolutely a distinct vision. And for the vast majority of the runtime, I can say he succeeds in his goals. this is a slightly grimy but technically proficient film that shows what it needs to show over just telling the audience, and while subtle, there's a distinct tongue-in-cheek element to the direction of this picture that runs dark humour right the way through the thing, reminding me of some of Rob Zombie's earlier offerings. Direction of the cast too is razor. It's clear that close communication was important here, and all of the cast seem to have been given pretty much the perfect balance of instruction to improvisation ratio. This allows for the full exploration of props and set spaces, while also keeping them cleanly focused on achieving the right tone and vibe of the scene at hand. While I haven't seen all of the video nasties at this point, I'd feel fairly confident in saying that, as far as cast direction goes, I think this would easily rank in the top 10, maybe even the top 5. Which, given that some of these nasties absolutely nailed cast direction, I feel that's a tremendous compliment. As for the cine, it's good. Again, nothing revolutionary or groundbreaking, but shots are mostly well composed, they follow the rule of thirds, I believe the lines kept in check for the full runtime. The colour scheme is quintessential of the late 70s and early 80s, with browns, dark greens and oranges seemingly being the colour palette of choice here. And it's utilised to great success, I feel, creating a somewhat bleak but visually pleasant aesthetic. Again, I'm going to be honest here, this thing isn't pushing any boundaries, but given it's a low budget feature that's on the video nasties list, and given that when it comes to the nasties, if the film manages to actually have the camera pointing the right way and they have B-roll, they're in the top 30% by default, let alone if they're good, this thing's a border miracle by comparison. A film made almost entirely by first-timers or newbies that would honestly give some of the mid-budget studio efforts a good run for their money. In fact, on this front, I only have one slight gripe, and that lies in the editing, which, for the most part, is actually pretty great. Cuts are usually pretty well timed, there's some experimentation present, they at least try to utilise some B-roll, but that experimentation does come at a bit of a cost, because one thing that they do play around with is film speed, and in particular, speeding up the footage. Now, most people love a good slow-mo action scene or two in a movie, but here they experiment with speeding the footage up, which results in an almost Benny Hill style effect that I don't think suits the tone of the rest of this film at all, and to quote the late great Terence Dicks, looks bloody silly. I was not a fan. Also plaguing this film for some reason is a strange warping and juddering. Whether this is just a side effect of poor remastering or someone fucked around with the frame rates during the original edit, I'm not sure, but there are moments where the cast seem to almost phase and stutter within the frame. It's weird. As a one-off, I don't think I'd have noticed it, but on my DVD copy at least I caught it doing it a good half a dozen times or so. Performance-wise, there's only really 2 stars here, and that's Robert Judd as Ted Turner and William Sanderson as Jesse. The pair work together incredibly and really set the tension and pace. Both give incredibly believable takes on their characters, both are animate, lively, and read their lines with conviction and a genuineness that I feel is worth quite high praise, honestly. As far as leads go, I think they're more than decent. It is, however, a bit of a shame that the rest of the cast not only don't seem to quite match the energy of the leads, but if anything are left to feel quite underplayed as a result. Chino and Chow, Daniel Feraldo and Peter Yoshida respectively, are both fine enough playing Manson family-esque strong eccentric types, but they both get sidelined by Sanderson's bombastic personality and ultimately feel more like played-down henchmen than getting their chance to really show why they're just as dangerous as Jesse. They don't give bad performances, but the quality gap between their takes and Sanderson's is beyond noticeable. The same goes for the cast making up the Turner family, they just don't have good material to work with, and given Judd's turn as Ted is really quite A-grade, it ends up leaving them somewhat floundering to find their space and place in a film that really should be about them. With of course the exception of Layla Small, who plays Grandma Turner, who, while she may not have a particularly strong physicality in the role, more than makes up for it with some prime sarcastic and dry humour line delivery. She's arguably my favourite character in this whole thing. And finally, the soundtrack. and it's an incredibly underrated funk and soul score that's bright, period authentic, and given the bleakness and tone of this film, somehow suits it almost perfectly. It slots in appropriately across the runtime and sounds frankly bloody great. I'd love to get a vinyl copy of this one if I could. There are a couple of wobbly ADR moments here and there, but nothing too far out of the unusual. On the whole, the soundscape is actually pretty solid, and in particular, the use of silence or just ambient noise is something that I personally really appreciated here in helping to create that sense of isolation. I thought it worked really quite well. Fight for Your Life was initially refused a cinema certification in the UK in 1981, but that didn't stop the home video trade, who released the film cut by approximately 3 to 4 minutes in 1982 by the Vision On Video Film Company. In 1984, the Video Recordings Act would essentially put the film on ice, and since then, in the UK at least, the film hasn't been seen again in any format. Which I think is actually kind of insane really, given that it would be very easy to have edited the offending footage out of this film, taking it down to around about 80 to 81 minutes with very little issue. As of 2025, I see absolutely no reason why this film couldn't get a re-release in the UK officially. But that then leads me to its international history, which is a bit of a tale. So, in the US, the film had absolutely no issue with getting released. It hit cinema screens in 1978 and arrived on VHS around 1981 and basically kind of just drifted into obscurity. That is until 2004, when Blue Underground picked the film up for distribution on DVD. This is the release I have, and it's quite bare bones. There's a commentary track, 3 trailers, and that's about as good as it gets. But the picture quality is pretty solid honestly, with only a couple of inserts looking a little worse for wear. I've seen way worse. The issues arise around 2012 when, through terrible misfortune, all of the original camera negatives for the film got destroyed as the warehouse storing them was sat in the path of Hurricane Sandy, making a true HD restoration of this film kind of impossible outside of trying to source an old original 16mm film print struck from the negatives. As such, for the time being at least, DVD is as good as it gets. And while it is a good release, I'd have really liked to have seen a mini making of on this one, as it would have really helped to round the set off. It's good, but it absolutely could have been better. Fight for Your Life genuinely surprised me. I was expecting a low effort, low budget, low charm exploitation flick that would leave me feeling somewhat grubby by the end. Instead, this is actually a surprisingly well-made offering that really went above and beyond my expectations and left me genuinely entertained and engrossed as a result. While it is at times a touch problematic and on a technical level I have some questions, I think this is a pretty decent film that probably kind of did deserve to be on the Nasties list at the time, but only by the skin of its teeth, and it definitely shouldn't still be being refused a release at this point. Definitely worth your time. If you're working your way through the Nasties and haven't caught this one yet, I'd say bump it up your list.